Okay, guys, we are back here again. We are working with our North Carolina coach book. If you would like to follow along, you may get a book. We're going to be working on our gravity and friction one today. So if you will get that out, if you want to follow along, we are going to be on page 23. So that will be an option. I'm going to get started by reading. When you throw a ball up in the air, you know that it will fall back down. This happens because of a force called gravity. Another force acts to slow the ball as it falls. You will learn how these forces affect the motion of an object. Gravity is the force that pulls objects towards each other. Gravity attracts objects towards each other even if the objects do not touch. You probably think of gravity as a force pulling objects towards the ground. But this force acts everywhere in the universe, not just on Earth. Gravity pulls all objects in the universe towards one another. So we're going to come back over here. Blank is a force that pulls objects towards one another. It's going to be gravity. Gravity attracts objects. Gravity attracts, right here, that first paragraph here, gravity attracts objects toward each other. So that would be your second blank. Even if the objects do not touch, gravity pulls all objects in the universe toward each other. Okay? Now we're going to look at the second paragraph here. Any object with mass exerts a force of gravity that pulls an object around it. The more mass an object has, the greater its pull on gravity. Gravity keeps you from floating off into space. Gravity helps keep the moon in orbit around the Earth. Gravity also helps keep Earth in orbit around the sun. Just as you are attracted to Earth, Earth is attracted to you. You notice only that the force of Earth exerts on you because the force you exert on Earth is so much smaller. The force of gravity depends on two factors. These factors are mass and distance. Recall, all the mass is the amount of matter that makes up an object. An object with more mass exerts a greater force of gravity than the object with less mass. Think about an apple falling from a tree to earth. Both the apple and the earth pull on each other because they both have mass. But because the apple's mass is so small, its force of gravity is very small. It does not pull very strongly on Earth. So when we're over here looking at this, and it says, turn on the light so you guys can see. And it says, the more mass, you can see where I have erased, the object has, the greater a pull of the gravity. Gravity keeps you from floating off into space. The moon, and it keeps the moon where? And it keeps the moon in gravity helps keep the moon in orbit. Zoomed in a little too close. Around the Earth. And Earth is in orbit around the Earth revolves around the sun. The force of gravity depends on two factors. What did we say the two factors were? Look right here. These factors are Right. Mass and distance. Mass and distance. Gravity attracts blank objects towards one another. Gravity attracts all objects towards one another. Okay, we can answer the next one. If mass is more or greater, I'm going to put greater. Gravity is going to be what? Greater. If the mass increases, gravity is going to increase. Blank is not the only force that acts on objects falling to Earth's surface. So mass, because remember, we have distance in here. Mass is not the only force that acts upon objects falling to the surface. Okay, and we're going to turn the page here. Earth has much more mass than an apple. This means Earth's surface of gravity is larger than the apple's force of gravity. Earth's gravity pulls the apple down to the ground. As the apple falls, its gravity actually pulls Earth up on a very small distance. But Earth moves only the tiniest amount because Earth's pull is so much greater than that of the apple. The second factor that determines the force of gravity between two objects is distance from each other. As an object moves closer together, they pull on each other grows stronger. As objects move farther apart, the pull on each other weakens. Think of a spacecraft traveling towards another planet. As the spacecraft moves away from Earth, the Earth's pull on it decreases. As the spacecraft moves closer to the other planet, the planet's pull on the spacecraft increases. So look at your little picture here. This little ball, you can look at the arrows and see, they're not as close as this one because they're farther away. The one that has the most gravity and force is this one. The distance is there and their mass is there. So it's also bigger and it's also closer. So it's going to have a better chance. And the smaller they are and the less they are farther away, it's going to have a decrease on their ability here. When objects fall to Earth's surface, gravity is not the only force that acts upon them. Friction is a force that acts between the surfaces that touch each other. So I made a mistake. It's not mass. So this one's not mass right here. This one is, we just read it. This one is friction. So this one's friction. Friction is not the only force that acts upon falling to Earth's surface. Blank is a force that acts between the surfaces that blank each other and tends to blank an object's motion. So let's read this. Friction tends to slow an object's motion. When an object is moving, friction tends to push in the opposite direction. If you push a book across the table, between the tabletop and the book slows the book's motion. So, blank is the force that acts between surfaces. So we know it's friction right here again is the force that acts between surfaces that blank each other and tends to blank an object's mass. Friction is the force that acts between the surfaces that touch each other. So this one right here that touch each other and tends to write it in, slow an object's motion.